There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light, he came only as a witness to the light. Now this was John's testimony when the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, "I am not the Messiah." They asked him, "Then who are you? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Finally they said, "Who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, "I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord." Now the Pharisees who had been sent questioned him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" "I baptize with water," John replied, "but among you stands one you do not know. He is the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie." This all happened at Bethany, on the other side of the Jordan, where John was baptizing.
A movie franchise that we really enjoy is the Ocean's 11 franchise. We've watched them through a number of times, but we always find them very enjoyable, very funny, very clever movies. In Ocean's 12, there's a character called Tess Ocean who's played by Julia Roberts. Now, Tess's husband has been thrown in jail for trying to steal a very expensive piece of art, and Tess is kind of roped into the operation. The gang know that they can't steal this piece of art in a crowd. They need exclusive access. And so what they want is they want Tess to pretend to be a celebrity so they can get access. And of course, which celebrity is she going to pretend to be? Julia Roberts. So you've got Julia Roberts, who is playing the part of Tess Ocean, who's pretending to be Julia Roberts. It makes a very funny situation. But it reminds me of a fad that was going around Facebook a couple of years ago, all around doppelgangers. So people who you're not related to that you look like. And the fad was that people would try to figure out who their celebrity doppelganger was. So who was the famous person that they looked like? And so instead of putting their own picture on their Facebook profile, they would put the picture of the celebrity that they looked like. It really gave you an indication of the health of some people's self-esteem. But I really struggled to figure out what celebrity I looked like. You know, this was back when I had hair on my head but not on my face, and so I suppose my look was a little bit more generic. And so I asked a few people who they thought I looked like. And some of their answers were flattering, some were not so much. But eventually I just gave up on the whole thing because, to be honest, I didn't really care who I looked like. What's more important is who I was, or perhaps who I acted like. We did our out training at Caloundra Core on the Sunshine Coast, which was very difficult, living 5 minutes from the beach, but someone had to do it. And so at Caloundra Core, there's a gentleman in the Corps who he either did training with my grandfather or worked with my grandfather in the early stages of their officership. But on one particular Sunday, he approached me after I'd preached my last sermon at Caloundra. And he said to me that if he was to close his eyes, he would swear that he was listening to Earl, so listening to my grandfather. And that was a huge compliment for me, because my grandfather was well known for being a good speaker. But another compliment that I like to receive is that I remind people of either my dad or my mum. Because, you know, I love my parents. I have a huge level of respect for them, for the people that they are and for the kind of officers they are. So for someone to say that I remind them of my parents, it's very flattering. But ultimately, the person that I want to remind people of is Jesus. And I think that's true of every Christian, that they want people to see Jesus in them. In this story of John the Baptist, it seems like he has a bit of a case of a mistaken identity. But before we get too far into this story of John the Baptist, I just want to acknowledge the fact that I know that here we are in the third week of Advent, and still we have not touched the Christmas story. In the first week, the sermon was called Coming Soon, and the passage was really about the second coming of Jesus, not the first. And then last week, Nicole introduced us to this character of John the Baptist in the sermon called Opening Credits. And here today, in John the Doppelgänger, we're continuing looking at this story of John the Baptist, experienced 30 years after the birth of Jesus. But I'll explain to you why it's relevant. In our readings from today, John has said that his purpose was this. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light, he only came as a witness to the light. John's purpose was to prepare the way, to prepare people's hearts for the coming of Jesus, the coming of the Christ, the Messiah, the Saviour, the light of the world. And here we are in the midst of Advent, in this period of waiting, of anticipation, a time of preparation for the coming of Christ. So whilst this story might be 30 years after the birth of Jesus, it is still relevant to the Christmas story, and it's still relevant to the situation that we're in right now, in the midst of Advent, as we long for and wait for and prepare for the coming of the Christ child. So John the Baptist, he's preaching, he's baptizing, he's preparing people for the coming of the Messiah. And so the Jewish leaders, they send out a delegation of Pharisees and Levites to come and to try and figure out who is this guy. I mean, based on the way that he acts, the way that he dresses, the way he talks, the way that he's able to draw a crowd, there is something about him. Could he be the Messiah? Could he be the one that they've been waiting for? And this was John's testimony when the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, "I am not the Messiah." Notice how quickly and bluntly John proclaimed, "I am not the Messiah." There was no mincing of words. John is very direct. It seems like he answered their question before they asked it. I am not the Messiah. But his witness, his testimony, his mannerisms, the fact that cities were empty, the temples were empty as people were drawn out into the wilderness to go and see him, says that there's got to be something about him that's different. So if he's not the Messiah, who could he be? And they asked him, "Who are you then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." Now, why would they think he's Elijah? I mean, the Jews, they knew their Bible. They knew who Elijah was. They knew that one day there would be a Elijah or an Elijah-like figure who would come and proclaim the day of the Lord. If John is not the Messiah, then maybe he is the one that comes before. But John says, "No, I'm not Elijah." Well, if you're not the Christ, if you're not the Messiah, and if you're not Elijah, are you the prophet? He answered, "No." The prophet, once again, is another one of these kind of end-time figures mentioned in Deuteronomy 18. "I will raise up from them a prophet like you," so like Moses, "from among their fellow Israelites. And I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name." But when John is asked if he is this prophet, he says no. They just can't figure him out. There's something, yes, strange about him, but there's something more. There's something different, something enticing, something that draws people out. You know, when Nicole and I got married, we weren't going to have a photographer. We had a very limited budget. And so basically we were going to just ask people to take photos and then to send them to us. But there was a woman in Nicole's office at DHQ who got married a couple of months before we did. And she was talking about her photographer and how great he was and how reasonably priced he was. And so we went and saw him, and eventually we hired him as our photographer. But both of us came away from that initial meeting saying, there's something different about this guy. You know, we never got onto the topic of faith or anything like that, but we would not have been surprised if he was a Christian. Just by the way that he spoke, his ethics, his integrity, his generosity, all kind of pointed to someone who was living on a different level, living according to a different set of values. When we look at this story of John the Baptist, I hope that it causes us to ask the question, is there something different about me? By the way that I live my life, is it a kind of life that is going to make people stand up and take notice? I mean, there are a lot of people in the world today who like to wear the label of Christian, but you wouldn't know that they're Christian unless they tell you. You see, the kind of life that Jesus calls us to is this kind of life on a different level. We function completely differently to the way the rest of society functions. There should be something different about us. Would people be surprised to find out you're a Christian by the way that you talk to people, by the way that you act, by your character, most importantly, by the way that you love other people, particularly people that they don't think deserve it? I was listening to a leadership podcast this week, and the guy that was being interviewed quoted Charles Spurgeon, very famous preacher. And it's a great quote. He says, every Christian is either a missionary or an imposter. Which are you? A missionary? Someone who is out in the world every day, living as Jesus calls us to, loving like Jesus calls us to, being a voice for God in the wilderness every day? Or are you an imposter who perhaps comes to church every Sunday and receives and soaks in, but doesn't take it out into the world, doesn't have an impact on the community, doesn't live differently to the rest of the world? If every Christian is a missionary or an imposter, which one are you? So now the time of guessing is over. They really want to know who this guy John is. Finally, they said, "Who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, "I am the voice, the one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord." John knew the calling on his life, that his purpose was to help prepare people to meet Jesus. And as important as John might seem to us or to the story of Jesus himself, he understands his place and he understands his purpose. He understands himself to be simply a voice declaring the truths of God, pointing the way to Jesus. Yes, he is there to prepare people's hearts, but then when Jesus comes on the scene, he steps back and lets Jesus work and lets Jesus receive all the glory. The point of John's answer here is that he gives himself no prominence at all. It's all about Jesus. He is simply a faithful voice, a tool to be used for the glory of God. if you were to consider yourself as simply a voice, simply a tool to be used for the glory of God, how does that sit with you? Because to be honest, if you want to be effective in the work of God, and if you want to be effective at ushering people into the kingdom and into the presence of Jesus, the most effective way to do that is just to simply be a voice. To be a voice who declares the truths and the glory of Jesus, someone who gets out of their own way, who puts their own ego aside to let Jesus do his work and to let Jesus receive the glory. We need to be a voice in our community. We need to be a voice in our community who declares the answers are found in Jesus. Because we know that the answers aren't found in drugs and alcohol. We know that the answers are not found in wealth and possessions. We know that the answers are not found in power and position. The answers are only found in Jesus. And people are not going to hear it unless we use our voice. Unless we go into the wilderness and proclaim that the Lord has come. But if you're simply a voice, why then do you baptize if you are not the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet? Let's not miss the significance of this question. Baptism was not an unusual practice for the Jewish people. If someone was coming into the Jewish faith, they would be baptized. If you're a particularly pious Jew, you might baptize daily. But normally, baptism was self-administered. You would baptize yourself. But here you have John, who is baptizing other people. And this is what intrigues the Jewish religious leaders. If he's the one that's doing the baptizing, he obviously needs to be someone of significance, someone who carries power and authority. And if that's the case, who is he? Or in whose authority does he come? But John answers them this way. I baptize with water, but among you stands one you do not know. He is the one who comes after me, whose straps of his sandals I am not worthy to untie. John's baptism was a baptism of repentance. It was a baptism to prepare the way. The work of John was to straighten the paths, to flatten out the highways, to prepare people to meet with Jesus, to allow the power and the glory of the kingdom of heaven to come and to infiltrate their lives. John came as a witness for Christ. He came to prepare the way for Jesus to come. He came to be simply a voice, a tool to be used for the glory of God, to spread the truth of Jesus, and then to get out of the way and allow Christ to transform people's lives. This is what we are called to. And what better time to do it than now at Christmas? A time when people are coming to us for help because they've discovered they can't find the answers anywhere else. The time when people are inadvertently hearing of the story and the message of Jesus through the carols that are played and the carols that are sung. Let's make the most of every opportunity that we have to be a voice in the wilderness, to proclaim the coming of Jesus. So are you a missionary or an imposter? All of us have been called to be a disciple and to disciple. All of us have been called to live differently, to love differently, to help in the act of preparing people to meet with Jesus, and then to get out of the way and allow Jesus to do his transforming work in their lives. So are you a missionary or are you an imposter? Whatever your answer is to that question, only you know. I would encourage you, as much as you can, to envelop yourself in prayer, Ask for the Holy Spirit's presence to be with you, evidently with you, always. To show you the opportunities you have to live differently, to love differently, to have people see that there is something different in your life that points to someone greater. Be a voice in the wilderness. Make straight the paths, flatten out the highways. Proclaim the coming of Christ this Christmas. God bless you. We'll see you next week.